introducing Jenna, the latest free system update for Origin. So with our free system updates, we're at letter J now, Jenna. We've come from A. You've seen all of our existing customers have been able to install these over Wi-Fi with just a single click for free. And with each release, we improve performance, we improve usability, and we add new features. So we've done all of that here. We'll draw your attention to a couple of key new features, manual touch-off and depth encoding. So these change a lot of how robust Origin is and how clearly you can define your projects and make sure you don't cut too deep and cut to exactly the right depth you desire every time. Beyond that, there's actually a paid extension that's now available to download. Check out the website for more info on that. It's called Autopass, but for this video, we're going to look at the core free features and focus on them. Here's a situation where manual touch-off is going to be a huge win. So we're pretending we've got, say, soft wood, bass or something, but in this case, we're simulating it with some foam. This is cross-linked polyethylene, and we have a very sharp cutter in here, or an engraving cutter. So this is going to plunge into my material when it does an auto touch-off. So in order to trigger Origin to tilt back and detect when it touches the surface, it's going to kind of have to mash into this soft material. It failed to get a good reading there. That's because it just sort of slowly moved Origin. It didn't go touch and instantaneously move. Not only that, the surface of our material has been marred up pretty badly, like it's cut down into it. Now, we have the option of taking Origin to a hard surface. We don't have to actually touch off on the surface we're cutting. We just need some tape and drop it on a hard surface. We could do an auto mode touch off there, or we could try manual touch-off. So manual touch-off is a great option if you've got a delicate cutter. So if you're doing, say, frets for a guitar or something like that, you're going to have a very small diameter cutter that would be very fragile. So you probably don't want the entire mass of Origin pressing down on top of it. So let's take a look at manual touch-off. It's telling us the options here. It's much like when we do a gridding operation. We lower the bit with green, raise the bit with orange. A tiny tap will move a tiny amount, and then it gradually accelerates as I hold it down. So let's take a look at that. And I'm just looking down here to get a feel for where I am. As I move around, I'm noticing just an ever so delicate scuff of that top surface. So not enough that won't kind of rub off, but now I'm confident that I'm making a tiny mark, but not enough to actually damage it. So at that point, I can go set 0 and finish. Origin will record that reading, and now all my cuts will be relative to that accurate 0 height. So encoded depth fundamentals. This is just hitting the instructions. These will show up the first time you activate it. And it's just saying each path can have its depth encoded. Your cut depth, which is the top left corner icon, will indicate whether there is no depth encoded in the path you're hovering over, if the cut depth is shallower than the depth you're encoded, or you're cutting to the depth that is encoded, or you are going to cut deeper than the encoded depth. For more info, scan the QR and follow up on our website. So, what does this mean in practice? Origin has the cut depth up here. This hasn't changed. This remains the depth that Origin will cut to. So that remains at whatever you set it, 1.5 in this case, and it will cut to that depth when you hit the cut button. So that's a tool-wide setting. What we've added is the ability to encode depths. And then the relationship between encoded depths and the cut depth we'll get into in a second. So to get to encoded depths, we hit the depth button. And this element up here is where you manipulate encoded depths. So these are set per path. So instead of being a tool-wide setting, which is the cut depth, this is a per path setting. So if I move to a different path, you'll see that changes. So now I'm highlighting the outside path. And the key thing here is the little icon will tell us if our cut depth is too deep for the encoded depth, which this case it is. This one is encoded at 0.75. And then if I go to this path, it is encoded at 1.5, and I get a little tick mark here telling me my cut depth matches the encoded depth. So I can change them. So if I go over here and go edit this, I can go 0.25. And now from this point on, I'm going to get a warning telling me I can't cut this path because it's encoded too shallow. So you'll see it's encoded here at 0.25. And then it comes into its own even further when I say I want to cut at 1 inch deep. I'm setting my cut depth to 1 inch. I get an indicator that that is shallower than 1.5 inches. But if I come to this path that's encoded to 0.75, I get a little warning saying, hey, if you try to cut that at 1 inch deep, you will damage your workpiece. You'll cut deeper than the encoded depth. So that's great. And then if I was to say, I don't have my spindle on, but if I was to say I want to cut that, it's going to warn me and give me an exact info I need. So it will tell me, you're trying to cut it 1 inch deep, that exceeds the encoded depth, which is 0.75. Would you like to cut anyway? And I can continue, I can force it and just go cut, and it will do exactly that. I can cancel, revisit my settings, or if I'm working on, say you're working on a file that's been encoded with thicker board in mind or thinner board in mind, and the cut warnings are actually not helpful to you, you can just hide them, and they will remain hidden until you cycle the power. And at that point, this warning will display again if you attempt to cut deeper than the encoded depth. So you can set these in Studio, files coming out of Fusion, or directly on Tool. So we'll get into that with an application now, showing you how they work. For this application, we're going to take this step tenon and we're going to cut the mortises to accommodate that. So we don't want to cut this pocket to this depth by mistake. So using encoded depth, we're going to set this to 0.5 and the full depth one to 1.05 inches deep. And that way, when we go to cut, we don't need to run the risk of mistakenly cutting this pocket to this depth and ruining our piece. So here's an example of a file with no cut encoding. We're going to just quickly, it's approximately 1 inch thick. I'm going to cut that same profiles we were looking at into this piece of wood, just as an example. So you'll see here, I'm hovering over an unencoded path. Now, I'm going to set this deep one to say 1.05 inches. So I'm just going to cut a little beyond it. Now, if I set done, I'd be setting my cut depth, but I'm going to set it to my cut encoded depth. Encoded depth there is that, and then accept. We can confirm this. We get a little reminder, you're cutting less than the encoded depth because we're cutting at 0.25. So that's the full depth cut through the center. So I'll go done. You can see that that's the sort of diamond shape. And then this perimeter one, we'll do that half the dimension. Let's see here, we'll do it 0.5 on the dot. And we'll set that to the cut encoded depth. We can do calculations here, so I could, all the standard stuff you would do with Origin. We're just going to leave it at 0.5. Done. Now, none of this has set my cut depth of my actual tool, and that's fine. We're still going to go through our passes in quarter, half, 3/4. Because we don't have Autopass enabled here, we'll just do this with free software update version of Origin. Now, I'm getting a little reminder saying I can cut anywhere here, and I'm going to be shallower than the depth called out there. Let's go ahead and do this. I might change this to a pocket. We're going to clear all this area out and we're going to go down to the encoded depth of 0.5. So I'm going to do that one pass at a time. This is cutting down to 1/2 inch depth, and I had confirmation on my screen with the little white tick mark that I was cutting to the encoded depth. So now we're going to look at the diamond in the middle. I'm going to cut that to just over 1 inch, but also we're going to look at what happens when I go to cut this again at a depth that is deeper than it's encoded for. So keep an eye on the screen. It's going to warn me and say, hey, that's encoded to 1/2 inch. Are you sure you want to cut that? And I do not want to. So you can see there we could confidently cut down to the predetermined depths with depth encoding, and we were protected from cutting too deep into this little shoulder area here. So that is limited to a 1/2 inch cut there. So taking advantage of Jenna and encoded depth, we are confident now that our toolpaths are going to be cut to the appropriate depth. And to people paying attention to the extensions area, you'll notice that screen now has 3 available extensions. So by default, the free system update will ship with box joint basic and text basic. Those have enabled people to be super effective using Origin. They just take care of a lot of common, complex tasks in an easy, efficient manner. And then if you want to push things further, there's Autopass. So that's a paid extension that you can activate by going to the website and checking out Autopass. So it's targeted at deeper cuts, more complicated projects. So if you want to encode all your depths and then cut them without having to contemplate each pass and roughing and finishing offsets, you just say, hey, I want to cut this whole thing to 1.25 inches deep. Autopass will take care of transitioning down between all those roughing passes, then performing a finishing pass, then retracting. So you can think more about your design intent and let Origin handle the details. That means you'll get better outcomes, you'll be faster, and the mental load of operating Origin will be significantly reduced. So if you see that as valuable, take a look at Autopass. You can learn more here. You buy it once on the website, and you will receive an activation code that'll come back via email. You then enter that activation code, and then it remains on your tool forever. That's your copy of Autopass. And from that point on, your cutting experience will be vastly improved. So yeah, we're proud to announce our first paid extension and would encourage you to take a look at that. But as always, the core free system update has improved Origin throughout. You get the advantage of manual touch-off, you get the advantage of depth encoding, and that will protect you from damaging your projects inadvertently. Thanks for tuning in. That's the wrap for the Jenna feature list. We'll show you put them to good use in your workshop. Tag us on Instagram, #Shapermade, share your projects, share your thoughts, and then also on the community forum and share your projects on ShaperHub. Looking forward to see what you do with Origin. Thank you.